97% of men never truly understand what a woman feels when they suddenly disappear from her life and stop speaking to her forever. Today, you are about to discover 5 hidden emotions that often emerge when your voice completely vanishes from her world. But before we explore those emotions, there is one important principle you need to understand from the very beginning. One of these emotional reactions may genuinely surprise you. The reason is simple. Most men never realize the profound psychological impact that prolonged silence can have on another person. Many people assume that a lack of communication is nothing more than physical distance. They believe a woman will simply continue with her life, forget everything, and eventually stop thinking about the man altogether. However, human psychology tells a much deeper story. When a man completely disappears from a woman's life and all communication comes to an end, she is not merely losing a conversation. She is losing an emotional presence that had once become familiar and consistent. She is losing a voice that occupied a space in her daily reality. Psychological research suggests that the human brain reacts strongly to sudden interruptions in communication, especially when there was previously a meaningful emotional connection. Silence is rarely interpreted as the mere absence of words. More often than not, silence becomes a message in itself. And that is exactly why prolonged silence can trigger a surprisingly powerful wave of emotions. Now consider this question for a moment. How many times have you convinced yourself that your absence would mean nothing to her? Or even worse, how many times have you felt that your words carried no real value? This way of thinking prevents many men from understanding the true nature of emotional attachment and human relationships. When a man develops emotional discipline, inner peace, and respect for his own boundaries, he begins to recognize that his presence has significance. And if his presence has meaning, then his absence does as well. Silence is no longer something accidental. It becomes a conscious decision. And every conscious decision carries emotional consequences. The first emotion, deep confusion and uncertainty. At first, she may assume that you are simply busy. Perhaps you are focused on work, dealing with personal matters, or taking some time for yourself. She may tell herself that you will eventually reach out and everything will return to normal. But as days turn into weeks and the silence remains unbroken, uncertainty begins to grow. Questions start appearing in her mind. Is this temporary? Is he just taking space? Or is this truly the end? It is this uncertainty that creates such intense psychological pressure. She begins replaying past conversations in her mind. She revisits old messages. She remembers small details that once seemed insignificant. She searches for clues, looking for the exact moment when something may have changed. A lasting silence feels very different from simple distance. Distance still leaves room for hope. Silence removes clarity entirely. And the human mind struggles deeply when faced with unanswered questions. People naturally seek explanations. When none are available, the imagination often works overtime trying to create its own answers. That process alone can be emotionally exhausting. The second emotion, the loss of emotional connection. When you regularly communicated with her, your presence slowly became woven into her everyday life. Your messages. Your voice. The way you greeted her. The stories you shared. The small conversations that seemed ordinary at the time. Over time, these interactions became emotional routines. Many people fail to recognize the importance of such routines until they disappear completely. Then the emptiness begins to reveal itself. Perhaps something exciting happens during her day. Maybe she receives good news. Maybe she experiences a difficult moment. Her first instinct may be to tell you about it. And then she remembers that she cannot. There is no conversation waiting for her. No reply. No familiar voice. No emotional exchange. Your presence has vanished. And it is often in that moment that a person begins to understand the true value of a connection that may once have been taken for granted. The absence becomes impossible to ignore. What was once normal suddenly becomes something she misses. The third emotion, a powerful sense of rejection. There are many ways people create distance. Someone can reply more slowly. They can become less enthusiastic. They can appear colder or less engaged. But complete silence feels different. It creates a sense of finality. A gradual withdrawal may communicate, "My interest is fading." Complete silence often communicates something much stronger. It can feel like, "This chapter is over." That is why total silence is frequently experienced as far more intense than gradual distancing. A woman may begin asking herself difficult questions. Why was I removed from his life entirely? Why is there no communication at all? Why am I no longer part of his world? These questions can be emotionally painful because they challenge a person's sense of importance and belonging. And when people are left without answers, their imagination often creates possibilities that are far worse than reality. Human beings rarely fill empty spaces with optimistic assumptions. More often, they imagine the worst. The fourth emotion, helplessness. This emotion begins to appear when she attempts to reconnect. Maybe she sends a casual message. Maybe she reacts to something online. Maybe she finds a simple excuse to restart the conversation. Perhaps she only wants a brief response. A small sign that communication is still possible. But when every effort is met with silence, something important happens psychologically. She begins to realize that she has no control over the situation. And that realization can be deeply frustrating. People generally feel more comfortable when they believe they can influence outcomes. Silence removes that sense of influence. The more she attempts to provoke a reaction and receives none, the stronger the feeling of helplessness becomes. Every unsuccessful attempt reinforces the reality that the situation is no longer within her control. And this is where silence often becomes more powerful than words. Words can be argued with. Words can be challenged. Words can be analyzed. Silence offers none of those opportunities. It simply exists. And that can make it incredibly difficult to confront emotionally. The fifth emotion, the realization that silence has become a message. Perhaps the most powerful emotion of all arrives when she finally understands that your silence is no longer simply the absence of communication. It has become a message in itself. Sometimes silence speaks louder than the longest explanation. When someone repeatedly explains why they are leaving, they often remain emotionally attached to the situation. They continue investing energy. They continue engaging. They continue participating. But when communication disappears completely, it often creates a feeling of closure. A realization that something has truly ended. This is where many men misunderstand emotional strength. They believe power comes from having the final argument. They believe power comes from proving a point. They believe power comes from winning the conversation. In reality, genuine emotional maturity often looks very different. Sometimes it is found in calmness. Sometimes it is found in restraint. Sometimes it is found in the quiet confidence of establishing boundaries without drama, conflict, or emotional chaos. However, it is essential to understand something clearly. This perspective is not about manipulation. It is not about causing emotional pain. It is not about playing games with another person's feelings. It is about recognizing that communication has value. And if communication has value, then its absence has value as well. There are situations where walking away and choosing silence becomes a healthy decision. Especially when a relationship becomes toxic. Especially when respect disappears. Especially when interactions become emotionally draining. As a man learns to prioritize his own mental well-being, he begins to understand that not every situation deserves another explanation. Not every relationship deserves unlimited access to his emotional energy. Therefore, if you choose to leave quietly, do not do so from anger. Do not do it out of revenge. Do not do it to punish another person. Do it from a place of peace. Do it because you are protecting your emotional balance and preserving your self-respect. Because silence, when used wisely, is not an act of cruelty. It is a boundary. And once you understand the psychology behind all of this, you will stop wondering whether your absence matters. You will begin to recognize a truth that many people learn only after it is too late. People often fail to appreciate the value of a voice until that voice is no longer there. Never underestimate the power of consistency. Never underestimate emotional composure. Never underestimate the importance of healthy boundaries. Because in a world overflowing with noise, constant reactions, and endless distractions, silence can sometimes become the most powerful message of all.